If you try and show a retail fact sheet to an institutional buyer, they're going to be very disappointed at the depth and quality of information. If you try and show a document in a data set that's been designed to an institutional buyer, to a retail buyer, they're going to get lost. You also don't want to market to each sales channel with exactly the same message. And you have to really understand not only the channel, but the sales force that's dealing with it, the nature of the sales force, what information are they good at conveying, and what information does that client need to receive to be convinced.
Driving sustainable growth for a B2B company can be daunting, especially when trends in marketing are evolving so quickly. The road to success is continually under construction, so you have to be on the lookout for new insights to help you drive growth. Welcome to TrendSpotters. Our goal is to provide practical wisdom through brief conversations with B2B thought leaders to help you grow your business. Here's Candyce to introduce today's guest.
At a recent roundtable event, we uncovered some surprising trends in asset management marketing. 1, there is a huge difference between how marketing and sales define customer centricity. 2, asset management marketers have more severe alignment problems with corporate marketing than they do with sales. And 3, asset managers are facing significant messaging challenges in their efforts to be customer-centric across all their channels. Last quarter, we held our second annual roundtable for asset management marketers in Chicago. Senior marketers from 15 different asset management firms got together to discuss issues they're encountering and learn from each other. In this episode, I'm joined by our event sponsors, John Toepfer, CEO, and Emilie Totten, Head of Marketing at Synthesis Technology. We'll talk about what we learned and what asset managers are doing to address these problems. You can download a full report on the event at propelgrowth.com/roundtable. John and Emilie, thank you for joining me. I've really been looking forward to this conversation.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having us, Candyce.
Yeah, thanks, Candyce.
So we did a roundtable in May with a group of asset management marketers from a variety of different companies and saw some interesting trends being discussed at that table. One of the things that really jumped out at me was the discussion around alignment. And my understanding was that the alignment between compliance and marketing, which used to be a challenge, has actually gotten really good. And that was kind of cool to hear the stories about how well they're aligned with compliance. And it sounds like their alignment with sales is steadily improving, not across the board, but we're seeing improvement there. The thing that jumped out at me and surprised me the most was the challenges that the line of business marketers or the field marketers are having with corporate marketing and corporate branding.
Yeah, I see the exact same problem, and that was highlighted at the meeting. In fact, in scheduling this year's roundtable, we were expecting to follow up heavily on a key outstanding topic from the previous year's roundtable, which was the difficulty of sales and marketing alignment. And almost to affirm, they did report an improvement in that nature of their business. The topic was broached by one client who was having a specific issue with corporate versus business unit marketing, and the whole group kind of jumped on that as a perennial problem, wherein the idea is what is more important to serving the end marketing needs of the business unit? Is it brand-centric messaging from the corporate level or market-specific messaging related to the business unit in question?
Yeah, and I remember them saying that one of the biggest issues was how they're reporting up through the line of business, if they're reporting up to corporate or if they're actually reporting into asset management. So I thought that was interesting and maybe a takeaway for companies when they're thinking about how, those lines are drawn in terms of reporting up.
Yeah, and I remember that one of the big challenges they're having, especially with those global banks, is where the branding has to do with the overall bank, so commercial, retail, investment banking, everything. And that clashes with the brand or the brand identity for the asset management space, especially in circumstances where that corporate organization is known really well in their home country, but not so well in the U.S., for example.
It can be a problem with international firms in the home country problem, but it can also be with domestic companies where corporate marketing is just enamored with the idea that they are the big fish and they have this great brand, and they think putting that on every piece of literature is the key to selling product. People will buy our assets because our name is known 98% in the last focus group. And I don't think that's in alignment with what the asset management group is seeing in their sales and in their market needs with regard to how to communicate successfully with their clients.
I remember somebody from one of the largest firms in the room mentioning that specifically, that while the name of the bank is incredibly well known globally, most people don't know the huge variety of funds they offer and products that they offer. And so that was an interesting conundrum that she's facing.
Well, what's really funny is those huge banks, like you're mentioning, usually have a successful asset management group, but it's kind of underrepresented in the market, and they find themselves going toe-to-toe with small and mid-sized boutique firms who have their finger on the pulse of their market space with really good content and client-centric messaging that the big company they're missing. The big company can often fall in the trap of selling on the note of, buy from us, we're big, versus buy from us, we know you and we know X about the market.
Yeah, didn't you have a situation just recently where the sales team was trying to be really customer-centric and there was some discrepancy between what marketing was doing and what sales thought they were doing?
It was a fascinating experience that I had last week. I had the opportunity to be invited to the global sales conference for one of the largest diversified asset companies or financial services companies in the world. And this was their U.S.-based division, and there were representatives there from every form of financial services under the sun. If you just walked around reading name tags, you were dizzied by the variety of financial services this firm offered. We were participating as a technology vendor in a breakout session that was just for the retirement planning sales teams. And so there was 30 or 40 sales reps there, plus management, plus marketing in this breakout session. And it was one of the most lively and vigorous discussions I've ever seen in my life, with some of the topics being quite heated discussions of marketing saying, we're trying to move our branding and our messaging in one direction, and sales saying, oh, no, you can't do this, and do their version of client-centric messaging versus the marketing department's version of client-centric messaging.
And what was their version of client-centric messaging?
So the sales department is in the business of going out and presenting final presentations to their audience. And their big idea of how to be client-centric is to go to the client's website, I'm laughing as I say this, and steal imagery, copy down JPEGs and GIF from the client's website, and plaster that all over the presentation deck, or the finals deck, as they call it. So they basically rebrand their own materials to be in the client's logos and liveries, and then they go out and present to the client. And that's being client-centric from the standpoint of the salespeople. Marketing has spent a great deal of time studying this, focusing, grouping it, and deciding how to be client-centric in a more polished and professional manner, and is coming forth with a whole campaign with a really thoughtful message on, I don't want to give away their message or the client, but a really thoughtful message on understanding their client, but also emphasizing their brand. So they put their brand and their messaging with great consistency and continuity throughout the presentation deck, but then the contents of the slides are all about the client and making sure they understand what information the client is hoping that they have and that they hear and will remember. And so they've got lots of places and lots of ways that the deck can be customized to be client specific, but not at the level of replacing their logo with the client's logo. And again, the sales department lost their marbles on this, and the marketing department was put in the place of trying to explain that this is the way to go and this is the way that we need to make it happen. And I'm not sure they came to a consensus of opinion in this meeting, but I felt personally that the marketing department was on the right path. Yes, they were bringing forth their own brand more strongly and their message more strongly, but I don't think if they're taking finals presentations from 3 different financial services firms, the one that has the best theft artwork on their slide deck isn't the thing that's going to carry the day. The thing is going to be selling the brand and the overall client encompassing experience that the brand represents, not losing your brand to the client.
Right. I remember a conversation at the round table related to this where they were talking about the differences in expectations between the people that were selling into wealth management and the people that were selling into the institutional business. And the wealth managers were just interested in the beauty of the paper and the thickness of the paper and the way it felt and the way the brand was represented, where the institutional people couldn't care less about that. They just wanted to make sure the content was right. And I think that was an interesting discrepancy. In a way, it encourages me that the institutional wanted to focus on the content, but you can't ignore the brand or just slap a really pixelated image of the client's logo on there and think that you've been customer-centric.
Well, to me, what that emphasizes is the need to make sure you understand all of your channels and that all the channels can't be communicated to in the same way. If you try and show a retail fact sheet to an institutional buyer, they're going to be very disappointed at the depth and quality of information. If you try and show a document and a data set that's been designed to an institutional buyer to a retail buyer, they're going to be lost. They're going to be lost in the details and numbers. So if we're saying that you don't want to market to your specific channel of asset management from just the corporate bank level or something like that, you also don't want to market to each sales channel with exactly the same message. And you have to really understand not only the channel, but the buyer persona and the buying stage within each one of those channels, the sales force that's dealing with it, the nature of the sales force, what information are they good at conveying, and what information does that client need to receive to be convinced that this is the vendor that they should be placing their assets with.
Yeah, it's interesting. We saw the focus on customer centricity is varied among the firms. Emilie, maybe you can talk a little bit about what we saw, and you guys can comment on that in terms of the trends that you see overall.
Yeah, first I wanted to say just on the customer centricity topic that we were just discussing is that I think one key element of being in alignment with sales, when sales and marketing are trying to be in alignment, maybe start at what is customer centricity, because I think that the marketing department has a good handle on what customer centricity means, how to develop a good customer centric campaign around personas, et cetera. But maybe they take for granted a little bit that the sales team may not even know what customer centricity means, or they have different definitions, right? So
customer centricity is knowing what type of restaurant to take the client to.
Right. That may be the salesperson's point of view,
it could
right?
Be. It really could be. Yeah.
And, fair enough. Maybe the marketing person would never, think of it that way. So there's a lot that goes into it. But maybe, having those discussions about what is customer centricity? What is customer centricity for each of those channels? So I just wanted to bring that up.
That is such a valid point, Emilie, because I think that a lot of these marketers are not getting a lot of access to the customers to understand what the customers' needs are. They are reliant on the sales channel, and they need both, but they definitely need to be talking more and defining that. That's a good point.
So what stood out to me as being a real problem in terms of what the marketing people were talking about at the roundtable was just their inability to get access to the CRM, which is fundamental if they want to be able to see what's going on in the sales process. Because once they're getting a lead and passing it off, they have no visibility then into the customer life cycle at that point. So I think that's a real issue. And I think, Candyce, you were talking to a customer the other day about how marketing's requirements were dropped.
That was a fascinating conversation. So the outcome of it was that in this particular company, this is a mid-tier global bank that was implementing Salesforce.com. They were gathering requirements. And I think, if I remember correctly, she said that they started at the private banking side of the business and gathered requirements from both sales and marketing. So marketing thought that their requirements were going to be reflected and that they were going to have a great tool for doing a better job of evaluating the effectiveness of their campaigns, keeping track of what was happening with the customers so that they understood what actually converted a customer from prospect to first ticket dropped and then ongoing tickets dropped. What were they engaging in so that they could do more of that? Unfortunately, once the corporate side of the house got a hold of the requirements and started pricing everything out, they decided that it was going to be too expensive to do all of the requirements, which is understandable, but they just dropped marketing's requirements without even consulting or letting marketing know that those requirements had been dropped. So once it got implemented, they were actually surprised to find that they couldn't pull the reports that they were expecting to be pulled. Then as they started extending Salesforce into the rest of the organization, each time marketing's requirements were put on a back seat because it was viewed as a sales tool. And so consequently, they weren't really able to get access to the information they needed. But the people at the enterprise level, at the executive level, didn't understand the field requirements of marketing. And so their attitude was, well, we've given you the tools, so why can't you deliver this? The problem must be with you, not with the tool.
Well, I mean, that really is similar to the lack of alignment we found in the previous year's roundtable, where marketing was complaining or was revealing to us that sales sometimes just does not want their input. They don't want the leads. They don't want the strategies. They don't want the corporate gobbledygook that comes from marketing. And there was a sales representative in that meeting that year that was saying, yeah, there's not a lot of respect from the sales organization to the marketing organization. Luckily, that is the trend that we saw improving going into this year. But I mean, that ties into the roundtable. I mean, the client conference story I was telling earlier, in that the salespeople were extremely and arrogantly obsessed with the idea they knew best. They knew everything about application design, font choice, rollout plans, product strategy, client community. They knew everything better than marketing did in their humble opinions, which they were not very humble about. And so there's clearly room to improve in that area. And marketing is going to have to find the relationship with sales leadership so that they have the proper voice and the proper access, and the decisions they make are considered collaborative ones and beneficial to all parties in the organization.
Now, Emilie, we talked about that in the roundtable in terms of the division. We asked everybody to kind of talk about whether they were customer-centric or product or investment-centric, and it seemed like it was about 50-50.
Yeah, I remember in particular one marketer saying that, they're really trying to get with sales before they get too far down the path and try and create that customer-centric vision and asking those questions with the salesperson, and asking why. Why does this person care? And I think half of the firms in the room that were having good success with being customer-centric, they've really formed a partnership with sales. They've been successful working together on these campaigns. And I remember another firm saying, sometimes the customer is thought to be sales. Sometimes the customer is thought to be FINRA. One marketer said I think she was from a mid-tier asset management firm, said sales is our partner. And that's been their mantra. And that's something that, everybody has embraced in their organization. So it sounds like they're having good success with being customer-centric because that has come down from the top. The other half, some of the firms that were saying they're still struggling with being customer-centric, things are more product-focused. Coming down from the top is, the portfolio managers have a lot of say, or the sales organization still has a lot of say in the way that they want to do things, and marketing is kind of getting pushed out. So I think it's really sounded to me like it's a shift that has to happen, a mentality that comes from the top down, and a unifying type of vision for moving forward where sales and marketing are a partnership.
Yeah, it seems like the alignment problem is solved the more they focus on what does the customer need. And if we align together and go after delivering what the customer's looking for as a team, then alignment becomes less of a problem. And I remember somebody saying that even the portfolio managers and the strategists really got on board with this once they got an opportunity to get in the room with the customer and hear what the customer's goals were and focus on that. Even that alignment became easier.
The access to hearing the customer firsthand, or understanding that the input is coming from a customer, is absolutely huge. I've seen many examples of the portfolio manager or portfolio management team. They're very smart people, and they understand their financial instruments like nobody's business. And very often they come up with an idea of what to sell that is a little bit in a bottle. And then they go to sales and say, hey, can you sell this? And sales goes, sure, I'll sell this. But no one's quite asked whether it's a good idea, or ask the client first, what are you looking for me to create for you to sell? So it starts with bright idea and a salesperson running around pitching it, and with client feedback not in the loop. So the more progressive firms are always putting the client feedback in the loop, and sometimes originating the product design with client feedback and focus group sessions.
And that's a lot like how our business is run as well.
Yeah, exactly. Most of our product innovations come from direct feedback through our client service teams from the clients saying, this is great, it would be better is if it could do this also. And that's the type of thing that leads us down our path of refining and improving our product lines.
That's a great transition around customer retention, because I think that that's something that all of the firms need to do, and you guys are particularly good at it. Quite frankly, you're kind of the envy of a lot of technology firms, because you have something like a 95% client retention rate going back 17 years. It's not like a client retention rate over a couple of years, but you've had clients for 12, 15, 17 years. Talk about how you've accomplished that.
It really comes down to being entirely client focused in how we manage our business. In fact, when we try and build something that is simply thought up internally, even in that case, it's not built in a vacuum. It's always spawning off of something a client has said, here's a hole in my business, here's a need I need to be filled. And we've said this is something that is in our wheelhouse and we can extend our product line to deal with. But basically by being client-centric day in and day out in every conversation with them, we earn status as being trusted vendor who a client can confide in and tell us what they're really thinking versus having conversations that are abstract from what they're thinking, such as a client might tell a vendor, hey, I wish you had a button that did this. They would never call us up and ask for a button. They would tell us, I have a business problem that sounds like this. How would you like to solve it? And we would say, well, you need a button, but you also need a this and you need a data source, and we can help you plan that out. And we would work with the client to get to the need. So we move the client away from talking about the tactical solution and into the strategic solution. So the end result of that is very beneficial to all parties. Synthesis ends up with what we would consider a very sticky relationship with our customer because we're doing things that are unique and no other vendor can provide for that client. And the client ends up with a trusted partner who they know they can tell the truth to and ask for things that are out of the ordinary and not just in a box.
I think, too, it goes back to, our depth of knowledge in the asset management business. So 100% of our clients are asset management companies. So we're focused on this vertical. We understand, the data. We understand where it's coming from. We understand the common problems. And when you've been doing this for as long as we have, you've kind of seen everything. You've seen the challenges, the things that can come up. You can anticipate things that might come up. And you just have a better handle on trends in the industry over time. And going back to customer centricity, you can speak their language. You can use their terminology and use it correctly, and it flows off the tongue because we're living in this asset management bubble. This is all we do.
One of our biggest challenges in extending this model, though, is that we see a trend where companies in the buying cycle for technology, especially if it's being run through a purchasing or vendor management group, tend to treat the candidate vendors at arm's length and make it very difficult for the vendor to really, really understand what's going on in the client's world. We've seen clients doing very interesting things in terms of shielding us from the information we need to be really successful for them. So the successful client stories are the ones where our client opens up to us and other candidate vendors and has really candid and open conversations so that we can do our best job of serving them.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation and something that I think is becoming a challenge as banks try to consolidate vendors, as they try to drive more of the decision process through a procurement office, that sometimes we get too distant from the actual problem we're trying to help solve, and that's not to the client's benefit.
We find at times the purchasing department has abstracted the business group from the vendor group so thoroughly that you don't have an honesty and a transparency flowing back and forth. Whereas the most successful purchasing relationships that we've developed are where the business unit is directly involved and is very open and honest with the vendor community. And the purchasing department's job is to facilitate that those conversations take place appropriately in a fair and impartial manner.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point because in order for a firm to be truly customer-centric, they have to know what the customer needs and what is underneath the surface needs, what's driving those needs. Otherwise, it's awfully difficult to really deliver a solution, whether you're a technology vendor like Synthesis or you're an asset manager trying to help a client, an institutional client or an RIA or whoever meet their objectives. You have to understand the objectives and really be able to partner with the firm if you're delivering any kind of sophisticated solution to your client.
And what we're finding in the communication practices for the asset management companies that we service, a great deal of their literature, of course, is designed to influence their channel partners and their intermediary partners. And what they're learning is not to just dump data in front of those people. It's to make sure that they're helping these people understand the story behind the product line. And then hopefully that story gets conveyed forward to their clients and becomes part of the selling activities. At that same sales conference I mentioned earlier, had about 25 different asset management companies there represented acting as sponsors to the event. All of them are ringing the big breakout room or common room with tables with literature and giveaways on it. And as I circled the room and looked at them, I was kind of impressed that they were not just dumping fact sheets on their audience and saying, look at our performance by our fund. There were definitely plenty of fact sheets and fact-oriented literature available, but most of the literature that was most prominently placed had real storytelling and client-centric messages to it. So I've got a few in front of me now, such as here's one that tells a whole elaborate story on why we're constructive on oil. Or here's another one, the importance of downside protection, generational approaches to investing. So the documents are written trying to convey knowledge and expertise about their firm to the intermediary, who can then say, this is an intelligent firm, and then further share that message downstream to their clients. That type of literature and that type of communication seem to be the dominant theme among the materials distributed at this conference.
Well, and it sounds like that material is also oriented toward helping those investment advisors in that channel to help their customers achieve their goals. So it's like you have to help your intermediary succeed, because it's a channel business. And if your intermediary doesn't succeed, neither do you.
It's absolutely true. And we find different levels of approaches to that at different firms. So some firms' message in the way of supporting their sales channel is to say, you are not an originator of information or strategy. Your job is to make sure the client is happy, the calls are made, and that the right dinners and golf outings are participated in. We, the asset management company upstream from you, will take care of strategy and designing plans and literatures and messages for you to give out. So that's the type of communication we see in TAMP-style asset managers, which is extremely clear of the difference between the retail sales rep on the street and the wholesale sales rep. Other firms blend the messaging more artfully in that they don't want to pretend that the financial advisor or RIA is not making up strategy, but they're trying to influence the strategy messages that they're putting in front of their audience, and of course hoping that that influence leads to selling of their assets.
Yeah, that's a very different approach. And I suppose that there's some validity to both sides of that, because some investment advisors are really strategic and client-centric, and some really are just basing their business on relationships, and both types can be successful.
Right, absolutely. And then the art from the originator standpoint or the asset manufacturer level, as some call it, is to make sure that you've got the right literature to support both types of intermediaries.
It's a complex business problem for a marketer because that's a lot of buyer personas.
It really is. One of our largest clients has been talking to us about breaking down their content strategy in a more detailed manner across channels and buyer personas. And she's talking about multiplying the number of pieces of literature that they're producing by 4 or 5 times. That's a very daunting task. Unless you're going to skip channels or skip personas, it's kind of an all or nothing decision of whether you're going to try and craft your message that precisely, or whether you're going to say, forget it, I've got one size fit all literature and we're just going to hope for the best when it hits the street with the sales rep.
You know, there's a big trend, not just in the asset management space, but across different large enterprises of creating content that is modularized in order to do just that. So it's interesting, and your technology is certainly well suited to make that possible.
That's absolutely true, because what we find is that the thought leadership pieces, the educational pieces that are put out there are terrific, but they almost always need facts and data to go with them, not only to back up the presentation or the argument being made in the commentary aspects of the literature, but also just because at the end of the day, there is a product that you're trying to place. Even if they're convinced by the story you're telling that this is a great strategy, the next thing I want to know is how well your product performed within that strategy. And so you've got to have the numbers that go with the argument that's being presented. And so that's where synthesis often comes together with our clients in terms of making beautifully branded, content-driven, data-accurate pieces that can satisfy both the storytelling and story reading need and the data consumption need.
Well, this is a great place to close. I think we've run out of time, but thank you so much, John and Emilie, for participating. It's been a fun conversation.
Oh, it's been our pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Candyce.
That was a fun conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I did and would appreciate your feedback or questions. You can email me at candice@propelgrowth.com. You can get more information about John, Emilie, and Synthesis Technology at synthesistechnology.com. For a free copy of the Roundtable Report, visit propelgrowth.com/roundtable. To find a transcript for this episode and links to the Synthesis Technology website and John and Emilie's social profiles, visit propelgrowth.com/trendspotters and scroll to episode 9. While you're there, check out our other episodes. Each session dives into topics that help drive growth in your business. And join me in 2 weeks for our next talk.
Hey, thanks for listening. We hope you found value in today's episode and welcome your feedback. You can subscribe to the podcast via iTunes or Stitcher. We'd really appreciate your help with getting the word out about TrendSpotters. Could you please review us on iTunes and share the podcast on LinkedIn and Twitter? Thanks. For more insights on smart business growth, visit us at propelgrowth.com.